How's it going, and welcome back to my series on Icewind Dale, Rime with the Frostmaiden. In today's video, we will be taking a look at Chapter 5, Auril's Abode. In this chapter, we go over all the things that Auril does while she is at her supposed new home, and all of the great things your players can be getting up to. I must warn you, though, before I get into anything major, that there is major spoilers, so players that actually plan on playing in this adventure do not watch this. But DMs who want a hands-on approach and taking a look at what is all in this chapter, go ahead and stick around because there is a lot to cover. So here we are, Auril's Abode. So, of course, you've probably noticed it this entire time, Auril's Abode is not in the map of Icewind Dale. And why is that? That is because Auril's Abode is a moving construct. It is simply an iceberg that Auril can go ahead and move and anchor whenever she well chooses. And thus it doesn't make sense to have it on a map because it can be located anywhere in the sea of moving ice. That being said, though, it wouldn't be anywhere close to where it would actually be on this map. As we'll take a look in a moment, every way your players can get to Auril's Abode, it takes a tremendous amount of time. So we don't have the location on a map, but more importantly, why do your players want to go to Auril's Abode? Well, the book gives us two options. One, because Velen Harpel tells us to go there so that way she can go ahead and open up the Rated Glacier and get to the Lost City. And two, the characters can come to the island on their own, hoping to put an end to Icewind Dale's everlasting winter. These hooks, of course, have their own separate mileage. I'm willing to bet, though, that the best course of action you can take throughout the course of this campaign is to drip feed the idea that the only way your players are going to be able to stop Auril is by finding some magical artifact, some crazy device, something in the Lost City that can put an end to Auril's everlasting winter. If you have this idea throughout the course of the campaign spread saying, hey, you need to get to the Lost City, then it is going to be a much easier way to sell that your players need to go to Auril's Abode, because you can say, hey, there is a key that we need to find there. We're not going to Auril's Abode to kill her right now. That's way too hard. She's a goddess. She'll kill us all. We need to go to her house, steal a key, and then get the heck out of there. The reason I'm saying this, and the reason why I'm reiterating this, is because a lot of people get the mentality that when you're running this chapter, it could be pretty much the end. Your players could just show up to Auril's Abode, beat her down, kill her rock, or do whatever, and save the day, and thus chapter 6 and 7 are completely irrelevant. Don't play into that. Go ahead and make it so that Auril will not be killed on Auril's Abode. And how do you do that? Well, simply put, she won't die if she chooses to. As we'll get to later on in the video, when she is at her own domain, she can just go ahead and teleport wherever. So that way, even if she is getting beat up, your players are super well optimized, they're rolling good, you're rolling bad, that doesn't matter. You could just sit there and say, alright, Auril teleports away. Simple as that. And your players aren't going to be able to find her because she can just teleport wherever the frick she wants. Go ahead and hide out for a bit, and your players are going to be in for a terrible time. And the same thing with her pet rock, Iskra. If Iskra is taking some damage, it's just going to go ahead and fly away. It could just go ahead and fly up in a straight line, dashing, and fly way, way farther than anybody will ever be able to catch up to, because the thing can fly 120 feet around. If it dashes, that's 240. This thing's just going to fly away and preserve itself. In which case, your players aren't going to be able to stop it now. And hopefully that'll be incentive for them to actually go to the fun, exciting locations located in Chapter 6 and 7. In the Sea of Moving Ice bit, we get 3 ways your players can go ahead and navigate through the Sea of Moving Ice to get to Auril's Abode. The first being hitching a ride with Angajuk. And with this way, your players are going to be able to go underneath the water and make their way to Auril's Island in 3 days' time, which is awesome. This means that they'll be safe from the outside world, and they'll be able to actually see undersea. And actually we get to see here that there's some cool stuff under the water. We get shipwrecks, storm giant castles, and cyclopean ruins from the bygone empire of the giants known as Astoria. So, that's really cool. Your players get to do some sightseeing for 3 days and get to rest and relax. If you do it this way, though, if you're really itching for a fight, you can go ahead and just have some Sahuagin board the bubble and go ahead and fight. And that could be cool. The second option we have listed here is hitching a ride at Revel's End. Once your players go to Revel's End, there is a 10% chance that there is a ship waiting there for them, which they can go ahead and hire to transport them all the way to Auril's Island. The captain, Charlasta Stormsword, is a retired pirate, and she's got a big old crew of pirates, or, scallywags at the very minimum here. And she is going to go ahead and say, hey, you know, I'll take you over to Auril's Island. It's going to cost you some money. She is charging 1,000 gold for a one-way trip to go there and drop off all the party. And she's charging 5,000 gold for a trip there and for the pirates to go ahead and stick around. And let me tell you, that could be disastrous whichever way, because if they go there and they don't have a game plan to get out, they're kind of screwed. And two, even if the pirates do go ahead and go over there, there's a possibility that the rock could rock their ship. Haha. And lastly, here we have listed via the Griffins. If your players are familiar with the Goliaths up at Sky Tower Shelter and Wormdoom Crag and helped solve that problem, or if you just have someone that's a Goliath from the Sky Tower Shelter, then perhaps your players get loaned some Griffins, in which case they'll be able to hop on, fly all the way to Auril's Island, and get dropped off. Once again, this has the same problem of if they do not have a ride back, they can be screwed. But if the ride stays there, i.e. the Griffins stay there, then they could either die from the elements or they could get killed by the rock. Of course, this is just a small sample of ways you players could get to Auril's Island. What are some other fun ways they can get there? Well, for first off, what if instead of having to go all the way to Auril's Island comes to them? What if, you know, Auril just goes ahead and moves her entire island right there up on the shore? What if she gets up right as close to 10 towns as possible because she wants to see all of the destruction firsthand and wants to see all of the fun, cold that she is bringing to everybody? If you do this, then your players are just a jump, hop, and a skip away, and lo and behold, they're right there. Easy peasy. Another way your players could get there, of course, is simply teleporting. If you don't want to have to go through the whole rigmarole of having to travel all the way there over days of flying and sailing, whatever else, then you could just go ahead and have whichever Arcane Brotherhood member is helping out the party to go ahead and just teleport them there. And maybe even if you don't have anybody from the Arcane Brotherhood to teleport them there, maybe there's some other foreign entity in Icewind Dale that can go ahead and help them out. Who knows? Another possible way your players could get to Auril's Island is by flying the It Ascendant there, or at least hitching a ride there. Maybe they befriended the Gnome Ceramorphs there and are willing to go ahead and drop them off somewhere. Or if your players killed all of them, maybe they hitch a ride and crash the thing into Auril's Island. That could be a blast. And lastly, a very obscure one could be if your players are given the opportunity to walk on water. You could go ahead and have someone cast Water Walk on the party and say it lasts 7 days, in which case you put your players on a timer and say, hey, you know, you got to get all the way to Auril's Island and back before you lose out on all this water walking. Or hopefully someone in the party has water walking and they can get back at their own leisure. So many different ways your players can get to the Island of Soulstice, but as we'll get to right now, your players are not going to like what they see when they get there. So this is what we're working with. Your players will find themselves on an island that is resemblant of a snowflake. And this is awesome because if you're a snow goddess, yes, you are definitely going to make wherever you dwell in a snowflake. Which is funny because as we'll get to also at Grimskull, there's also a snowflake symbol in there as well. So awesome stuff. It states here that no matter which way your players arrive, just go ahead and assume that they are landing in Area 1, which is the docks. This is going to make life a lot easier and allow your players to follow a pretty decent track and get them to where they want to go. But of course, you don't have to have them drop off at the docks. You could have them just drop off anywhere on the island and have them navigate around and try and explore this region. However, something important to note, if your players are flying here on the backs of griffins, then they do not want to head directly to Grimskull, which is where Auril abodes. Because if they get within 200 feet, the rock is going to go ahead and fly up and attack the griffins. And this is really bad because if your players are up in the air and they go up against a rock in the sky, they're going to be destroyed because this rock will just go ahead and kill a griffin in pretty much a single hit. And your players are going to be plummeting down, and that's going to be disastrous yet hilarious. Like all good big bad evil guys, Auril has regional effects which she implements all around her island. And this includes the following. The save DC to resist the effects of extreme cold are 15, not 10. Whenever a creature that lacks resistance or immunity to cold damage spends hit dice to recover hit points, they do not regain the dice of hit points, they only get equal to their constitution modifier, which is terrible because that barbarian, you know, that's sitting there rolling that hit dice, they're like, oh yeah, baby, I'm going to get a D12 plus, what, 3 back. And no, you're just going to get the 3. Oof, that is a huge deal. That already puts your players on a timetable of they cannot last long because, you know, they're going to run out of HP. And lastly, the island is obscured by a huge wall of fog, and this is heavily obscured when you're in it and lightly obscured when you're farther away. And, you know, this is going to give this weird semblance of, oh yeah, you can definitely see that you cannot get near this thing without having to traverse through this heavy fog, and that could be terrifying. And that is definitely the reason why there's a whole bunch of crashed ships here, because they presumably go through this fog, then all of a sudden just get whacked straight into some iceberg. As I just mentioned, you should definitely play up the fact that this cold is going to kill your players if they do not hurry up. This is not a hex crawl that your players are going, you know, location to location in. This is not an area where your players want to spend all day long here and take a long rest and bust out the campfire. This should be treated as a location where this cold is literally killing you, and if you do not get what you came here for and get out quick, you are going to die from the cold. If you treat this as more of a timed caper versus just a straight up brawl that your players are going to be able to get through, then it's going to really push the fact that you cannot beat Auril on her home turf. You really need to come here, get the key, get out, find a weapon in the lost city of Ythryn, and then eventually come back here, possibly, and use that weapon to destroy her. And that is something that the Arcane Brotherhood members should go ahead and be saying. They should be saying, hey, you know, we can't stick around here. This is miserable. Let's go ahead and hurry up. In Area 1, we have the Ruined Dock, and your players go ahead and come through here. Then they'll be able to see that this place was clearly not meant for humanoid-sized ships. No, this was built for giants. And thus, your players are going to need athletics checks in order to climb up, or unless they have some climbing gear or whatever. Go ahead and nix this if you don't have any climbing gear, and if you don't have athletic people, go ahead and just let them say, yeah, you just go ahead and climb, because that'll be a pain in the wing if you have this arbitrary check for no reason. What's interesting here is your players will be able to find a character here named Sopo, who is an ice mephit. This ice mephit is simply bored out of their mind and is going to go ahead and try and latch onto the player characters when they arrive, and is just going to go ahead and have a fun time. What's really interesting here is the fact that ice mephits only speak Aquan or Auran, and, you know, those are obscure languages. Not too many people are going to have that, unfortunately. So if you don't have anybody that can speak Aquan or Auran, it states here that Sopo should just go ahead and just point and do gestures and stuff. And that can be pretty cute, of course. But if there's some things you want to convey to your players, and if you want to verbally trick them, just go ahead and just make the ice mephit speak common. Make it nice and simple. There's a cute little text here that says that Velen's familiar and the ice mephits do not get along, and they go ahead and play fight and stuff, and, you know, that's pretty funny. But once again, if you don't have Velen, go ahead and make it anybody's familiar that is around, you know, actually susses out Sopo's ill intent, and Sopo and this familiar can go ahead and scrap with each other. Sopo is actually going to try and lead the players all around the island to get them exploring. He's going to go ahead and show off all the shipwrecks that are around here and say that they're full of loot. He's going to say that the last ship that crashed through here had a survivor, and that survivor went and got themselves killed on the island. This is a really good hook, because this will get you Velen's Professor Orb. Professor Orb is a wealth of information and should totally be added to your adventure. Sopo is also going to mention that there are ice sculptures dotted all around that are so beautiful they would make you shed tears if it wasn't for the fact that it's too cold to cry. And lastly, the fact that there is a Yeti Cave here, and an abominable Yeti called Korga lives among them. So hopefully that'll spread some fear in your players of, oh yeah, there's an abominable Yeti here. Eesh. If shooed away, Sopo is going to continue following the party and just laugh whenever misfortune strikes, which is pretty funny. You know, an ice mephit at this level, they should be, by the way, they should be at the bare minimum 7th level, if not 8th or 9th level when they come here. And a single ice mephit is just nothing, right? Don't even bother at rolling initiative if they try and fight this thing. Just go ahead and hand wave it. Should your players go ahead and start exploring all the shipwrecks, possibly in the search of loot or anything else, maybe some information, or maybe one of their friends came here and they disappeared and they're looking for them. Whatever the case may be, they start searching the ships, and then you go ahead and roll. The interesting thing here is there is a clear typo. It states that for each site, roll a d20 and consult the shipwreck table. The shipwreck table is a d8, so go ahead and just roll a d8. But maybe don't roll a d8, because another thing is it states that no discovery can occur more than once. And lo and behold, if you check, there is 8 discovery locations, one of which has 2 ships, by the way. But it states that, you know, if it only happens once, then go ahead and just don't bother rolling. Just say whichever one is one. Go ahead and say, you know, clockwise or counterclockwise, it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. The results table is pretty neat here. We get a lot of interesting encounters. We have a frost giant skeleton encounter, encounter with 20 ghouls, some giant sharks, some marrow, some sea hags, an awakened walrus, giant oysters that your players can get a ton of gold from, and a giant-sized chest containing a bejesus ton of gold and a magical trident. Really fun stuff, and that can really reward your players if they go ahead and search around. But mind you, if they are spending all of the time and, more importantly, the resources searching all of these locations, that is going to make their lives miserable. Yes, they can get some benefit out of it in regards of gold and some magical items such as the potions and the trident, but once again, if this makes them weak for the upcoming battles to come, they could be in a lot of danger. In Area 3, we have Nass Lantomir's ghost. Nass Lantomir made her way to the island, and unfortunately for her, she got hit in a shipwreck and she froze to death. What's really interesting about this encounter is the fact that your players don't come across not 1, but 2, but 3 creatures located here. First off, they come across Nass Lantomir's familiar. Secondly, they come across the Professor Orb, which is a sentient item. And lastly, they come across Nass Lantomir's ghost. And of course, show off this fantabulous art to your players because it looks excellent and is totally foreboding and creepy. And the best part is, your players see that this dead figure is clutching an orb, and as soon as your players try to pry this orb away, Nass Lantomir's ghost is going to go ahead and pop up and try and possess whoever is touching it. If Nass Lantomir actually possesses anybody, she's going to go ahead and say, hey, you know, work for me, don't work for that Velen individual, or whoever Arcane Brotherhood member. And she is just going to go ahead and be like, yeah, I need to see that Codicil of White because I know for a fact that is going to be the thing that leads us to great fortune. She knows that the Codicil of White is located in Grimskull, which is at the center of the island, and she wants it more than anything. But what's really neat here is the fact that if your players actually go ahead and get the Codicil of White, they can actually bring it back to Nass Lantomir's ghost, and that will be enough to alleviate her spirit, and she will go ahead and pass on. But if you have a group that is more into the shotgun diplomacy side of things and tries to fight the ghost, then they go ahead and banish the ghost, but only for 24 hours. After 24 hours, Nass Lantomir's ghost is going to appear where her body is, but not where her body is exactly, it's specifically where she died. If your players try and move the body to somewhere else, then that doesn't matter because Nass Lantomir is tied to that specific location. But Nass Lantomir isn't the only thing that's really special about this location. It's the fact that your players can get themselves a Professor Orb, specifically Professor Scant. And my oh my, is this the exposition that you need to throw into the campaign that your players are definitely going to need later on. Professor Orbs are essentially orbs that are sentient and possess a wealth of knowledge. These things have an intelligence of 18, so more often than not, they're way smarter than anybody in your party, except for the wizard and artificer, of course. But what's interesting here is individual Professor Orbs, you roll a 3d6 for their wisdom and for their charisma, and to give them their own personality. Maybe Professor Orb could be more wise to the world, and maybe the Professor Orb would just be an uncharismatic asshole to everyone, which is hilarious. Professor Orbs have extensive knowledge on 4 very narrow academic subjects. What these 4 are really doesn't matter if you are running just any random Professor Orb, but this Professor Orb in particular, it has the following expertise. It knows the history of Netheril. It has knowledge on vampirism and the traits of vampires. It knows all about rituals surrounding the making, bottling, and drinking of Elverquist. And lastly, it has knowledge on the Tarrasque. Whenever it makes any type of knowledge roll on any of these, you just go ahead and roll a +9. Or more importantly, you just say it knows everything about those 4 specific subjects and you don't have to leave things up to dice. Professor Scan's got a little bit of a personality to them. They basically just treat everyone around them like they're Neanderthals and is going to go ahead and explain things in a patronizing tone, which is pretty hilarious. So you can see how having the knowledge of all of these things is going to really pay out later on, because throughout chapters 6 and 7, they're going to be interacting with a lot of these things. They're going to be interacting with vampires, the Netheril, and most important of all, they could potentially interact with the Tarrasque. Now, the Professor Orb isn't needed for the adventure, but man oh man is having this orb around a great way to give exposition to your players whenever you want to give it. And more importantly, having a character tied to the party that isn't evil or isn't going to die because they're just a little orb is a great way to have something. That way you can go ahead and communicate whatever you want to your players. In Area 4, we have ice sculptures. Located all around the island are multiple areas filled with a whole bunch of ice statues that have been created by Auril herself. These things are perfect replications, and the only people that could possibly do this are goddesses and gods. These things are super well done. If your players get the bright idea to try and manipulate these ice statues, whether they destroy them or draw, a smiley face and a mustache on them, then Auril is going to cry out defilers and point a finger at them, and each character that went ahead and defiled any of the statues must immediately make a DC 20 Constitution saving throw or gain vulnerability to cold damage. Oh my goodness, if anybody gets a vulnerability to cold damage, there's a really good chance that they will die later on. This can only happen once a day. After a single time, she cannot do this for another 24 hours. But that's not all she does. Auril also telepathically awakens Korgra, the Abominable Yeti. And the Abominable Yeti is going to go ahead and track down the party and proceed to murder them. And presumably, if any of your players received vulnerability to cold damage, they're not going to have a fun time against an Abominable Yeti. Because look at that cold breath there. Instead of it dealing a measly 45 points of damage on average, if anybody's got vulnerability to cold, they're probably going to take on average 90 points of damage. Wowee. In Area 5, we have the Yeti Caves. All in all on this island, there are 7 Yetis, not including Korgra. Korgra is unique. If your players interact with these Yetis, then someone who has the littlest Yeti secret could potentially try and persuade them to not kill them. But more often than not, people are going to go ahead and get attacked by the Yetis. If all 7 Yetis are slain, then Korgra is going to go ahead and wake up and attack the party. Of course, if Korgra is already killed at this point, then you don't need to worry about it. And lastly, here on Auril's Island, we have the Garden of Death. Located all around this place is a graveyard filled with the dead of everybody who's landed on the island and frozen to death, because more often than not, people that have fallen on this island are going to freeze to death. In here, we find an ice troll who's simply waiting around and looking around a bit. And if your players linger in the garden for too long, the ice troll is just going to go ahead and attack them. Once again, having someone to exposition your players, everything is really nice because they can go ahead and tell your players, oh, hey, ice trolls are dangerous, but hey, if we eat their hearts, there's some good stuff to be waiting there. And having something like this, right, where your players can potentially get the regenerate ability for 24 hours, that's really powerful. But of course, if only one player gets it, then the players are going to have to be smart and say, hey, who are we actually realistically going to give the regeneration to? Are we going to give it to the frontliner who's getting hit all the time? Are we giving it to the squishy person that needs it the most? Who knows? So that is all the locations scattered around the Island of Soulstice. There's a lot of interesting locations here and a ton of great loot to be had. But mind you, you probably don't want to have this place just be a hack and slash exploration location. You probably want this place to feel a lot more depressing and a lot more despairing against your players. Something I didn't mention, which I totally should have earlier, was the fact that do you show your players this very map? Do you show them this super duper top-down perspective of Auril's Island? I personally would not, because one, it wouldn't make any sense. This place hasn't been mapped out yet, and if your players didn't fly and don't have any way to see from a top-down perspective, then I would not give them this information. I would probably go ahead and just tell them, all right, you just landed somewhere and you can barely see, what do you do? Because if you give your players this map, they're automatically going to head right to the center, right? They're just going to do it. So if you don't give your players this map, that'll at least give them an incentive to explore around a bit, and you can go ahead and push whatever you want on them. You can go ahead and say they stumble across a shipwreck, they stumble across the ice sculpture statues, they stumble across Nass Lantomir's ghost, etc., etc. Because, it really doesn't make any sense to give them this map. And especially, of course, if you have your players dropped off at Area 1 there, then they're more than likely just going to go ahead and follow the path anyway, in which case it makes the rest of this place completely worthless, because they're just going to stick to the blue brick road. That is going to do it for me for this video. A short one, I know, sadly, but of course, the Island of Soulstice, Auril's Abode, is, one entity, and then we have Grimskull, which is in and of itself a unique thing. There's a lot of things going on in there, and I want to go ahead and dive more into that in its own separate video. There is a lot of great things you can do with the Island of Soulstice here, and just looking at this thing, I already have my brain racked with ideas of fun little one-shots or possible little, hex-crawling dungeon design that you can have with this area, because the location's fantastic, it looks cool, and there's a lot of great things you can throw in here. And of course, I love the fact that your players are slowly dying, and they have to deal with the bitter cold. It is a race against time and a race against resources, and that's not something you see very often in 5th edition. In 5th edition, more often than not, you're always ready to go, always huffing and puffing, but because of the fact that your hit dice are not doing much, your health will run out eventually. Yes, if you do take a long rest, you will, of course, get your health back, but at the same time, you only get half of your hit dice back. So if you take a ton of damage throughout the day, then you go ahead and sleep, the next day you have only a couple of hit dice, and that is going to be a significant deal. If you get into more and more combats, you're going to get to the point where you have no more hit dice, and it doesn't matter anyway because those hit dice are so insignificant it doesn't matter. So that is a really fun aspect. But that is going to do it for me for the Island of Soulstice, Auril's Abode. Next video, we'll be looking into Grimskull itself, and that is going to be a blast. It is definitely one of my favorites, and my players had a ton of fun with those trials. So I cannot wait to see you all in the next one.